Hello and welcome back. This is Belkin Vanderspuds. I'm your host, and we're today talking about the November 8th, 2022 national elections coming up. So stick around and listen to our stories, and I appreciate you being here. Hello again, this is Belkin Vanderspuds, and I'm your host today. Today I am talking about the November 8th national election 2022, and I'm here to appeal to each and every one of you who actively wants to participate in voting. And I understand your desire to. Traditionally, U.S. citizens voted for representation where decisions were made for us on our behalf on how we would spend our shared assets as a nation, as a country, in order to benefit our society and the beliefs that most of the people in the United States, most U.S. citizens held. And we thought that representation meant that our elected officials did what was best for each and all of us. And unfortunately, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you a story about how our election has devolved and where we are today. And hopefully you'll take this to heart and you'll listen and you'll understand, because it's extremely important for all of our futures to know this. So now I'm going to tell you a story. It's a story that I heard a couple of years ago. A friend of mine was talking with a very wealthy individual, or somebody that most of us would consider to be a wealthy individual. And where he was, who the individual is, I'm not actually going to mention his name or even the city he was in, because this isn't a personal shame. This is just relaying a story about how our election system has failed the majority of us. This individual was a businessman. He was a local owner of real estate, and he was a relatively elderly man. He was in his 70s, but very smart, very wise, and he had been in the geographical area where he lived all of his life. Originally, he started out like many of the rest of us. He was not what you would call wealthy in any way whatsoever. And when my friend was talking to him, life had completely changed for him. He went from owning nothing to having his own personal office in his own personal bank that he owned and controlled. He had funding enough to allow him to take on just about any project he could imagine and see it through without the restraints of financial burdens. He had all the tools that he needed in place. He had all the legal representation. He had accountants and, anybody you could imagine that it required to not only run a business, but run a bank, run a real estate corporation, and to do business the way he had learned how to do it. And my friend asked him one day, an election was coming up, a national election was coming up, and my friend brought up the conversation. He said, do you consider yourself a Republican or a Democrat, and how do you usually vote? And this wealthy individual actually kind of paused, looked confused, my friend said, and he just shook his head and he said, well, okay, so I get it. You are from the majority of the population who thinks that today voting is something that is worthwhile. And he said, it's this fallacy that exists today that the majority of the population follows. And he kind of pointed it out as following some sort of sports team that a local city somewhere may have its own sports club, and they advertise that, the home team versus the away team, as if the players on the home team were actually from the city that the team was based in. Reality is they're from wherever they came from when they were hired to play for that city. They don't represent that city any more than they do anywhere else. And he said, so when you go to a sports team, you buy all the shirts, you buy the hats, you sit on the side of the stands to support your team, and you want them to win because then somehow it's going to make you feel like you're part of the winning team. And who doesn't want that? Anybody wants that. And that's where professional sports are today. Well, politics are much the same. It's game theory. He talked about the local or the election that was coming up, and he said, look, you're looking at this like, okay, there's two major political parties. There's the Republicans and there's the Democrats. Now, first, you want to narrow it down to which party advertises the things that you hold the dearest to yourself. What's most important to you, and which of those two parties, those two teams, sound like they're representing your beliefs? And he said, the truth is that they're selling individual packages because they know the population leans one way or the other. So the goal of politicians and political parties is not to always win the election. Matter of fact, if you look at historical graphs of who was in control for how long, what you see is that they constantly exchange back and forth, back and forth. Democrats are in power this time. Republicans come in after that, then back to the Democrats, then back to the Republicans. The question really is, has either one of those parties actually, over time, been solving the problems that afflict most of the population that is electing them and putting them into office? So he stepped back for a minute and he said, look, election's coming up, and I'm going to handle this election the same way I handle every election. He said, there's two political parties. There's going to be two candidates for every office that's coming open. And each one of those offices is going to have control, power over certain operations in the government. And some of those operations are going to be very important to me and my business in the future. So what I want to have is representation on any issue that possibly is going to come up, where any of these politicians are going to be in the position to control the outcome. So pick any office, governor of the state. There's going to be two political parties, Republicans and Democrats. There's going to be two politicians, one for each party. And when they run, they are going to be accepting contributions up to the maximum allowed by law. And those laws have been put in place by previous politicians in order to keep this system running the way it is. So, elections coming up, two politicians for governor, and I am going to contribute the maximum allowable amount of money to each one of those political parties, to each one of those candidates, to each one of those campaigns. And inevitably, all of the voters are going to line up on election day and they're going to vote for one or the other guy or girl. And somebody is going to win the election by votes. But regardless of who wins, I'm going to have the personal cell phone number or personal telephone number and email contact directly to that politician when he gets in office. If it's the governor of the state, as soon as whoever wins, it's not important to me, Democrat or Republican, whoever gets elected, as soon as he sits in office, I'm going to reach out and contact him. I'm going to congratulate him on a great job getting in office. And then I'm going to make an arrangement to go talk to him personally about some things that I need him to take care of for me. And he is going to answer that phone call, and he is going to make arrangements to meet with me at my convenience in order to hear what my problems are. So now at this point, my friend is a little confused, and he reaches out and he asks the next question. He says, well, then should I and the rest of the general public just not vote? I mean, if it's obvious that these politicians are basically working for the handful of large donor contributors, then what are we doing? I mean, it's not like I can pick up the phone and call a politician, and the governor's not going to take my phone call, not to mention I don't have his phone number and nobody's going to give it to me. So, should I vote for one person or another to be governor? And the wealthy man's response was kind of clear. He said, it is absolutely imperative that the general public continues to vote. Go to the polls, pick a person, and vote, because it adds absolute legitimacy to what I am doing. He said if nobody showed up to vote, then it would become pretty apparent pretty quick that this election process is as bogus as it really is. Right now, with people voting, nobody can say, oh, that person wasn't legitimately elected. Look, he got more votes than the other person. But for me and for what I'm doing, that we need to keep up the image that somehow our political system is working as it was designed. One other interesting detail that the wealthy man told him was, he said, most of these politicians only ever get on the ballots as a direct result of meeting with people like me. He said, I'm not the only one in the local area. There are other business owners and bankers and wealthy individuals, and together we make up the majority of the high donor contributions to all the political campaigns and all of the elected official positions. So any politician who wants to be in any particular office, before they even get noticed publicly, even if they're a new candidate or if they're an existing candidate who wants to get reelected, before their campaign starts, they come and talk to us. And it may not be, the X-Files image of a dark room full of guys smoking pipes and cigars, but it's not far from the truth. In this local area, there's, a group of pretty powerful people, and we sit down and we talk and we decide where we want to go in the next couple of years. What type of projects do we want to get done? But I can guarantee you it's from our own behalf, the wealthy man speaking. He's like, it's kind of, trickled down. If we do well, then it's probably going to be okay for the rest of the general public. But most important is that we do okay. And have no illusions. We're going to do what's best for us and our families first. Hopefully, that'll be good for everyone else as well. But that isn't our priority. So we get together, we decide who is going to be most likely, if elected, to continue this policy, this system of politics, and we make sure those people get elected. We make sure they're on the ballot. If they don't get our permission, they're not going to be on the ballot. You get somebody who wants to run for office who literally wants to change this system, and I can guarantee you they're not going to make it onto the ballot. They will never get elected. They'll never be put out there to be voted for. And the reason is pretty simple, in that if they admit they're not going to work for us, then they're not going to work. So then my friend asked the wealthy man, he said, okay, so I need to vote in order to legitimize the system that we have currently and to keep out of question whether or not our politics are legitimate or not. Even though I know that the elected officials at the very best are going to possibly consider the effects on me and my family in the decisions they make. But their priority, those elected officials' priority, is going to be to you and the other high wealth donors. He says, so my friend says, what would you say is the best thing that individuals like me, the general public, can do in this environment? And the wealthy man thought about it for a minute, and he said, well, it's really simple. The high-value donors get what taken care of. If you're not a high-value donor, then you're not going to get your interests looked at. You're not going to be represented by the politicians that get elected. So, as individuals, the answer is you need to collectively get together a group of individuals in your area or in your elected officials' geographic area, whatever that might be, state, local, or national. And individuals need to get together, group together, get a fund that they can use to donate and maximize the donations to an elected official that will do them the most good. The problem is that when you look at how much money I, as a wealthy person, contribute to the number of elections that can affect me locally and in this state, it's a very large amount of money. However, thanks to tax laws, and because I can associate my donations through my business entities, it's really a tax deduction. Ironically, that means that your taxes are paying for my contributions to politicians to do my bidding and represent me. The only way you get in the game is if you and other individuals can accumulate enough money together and agree on which politicians to support in elections that you can ever get say in what happens in the future. I hate to say this, but that's the reality. So that brings into question what to do next. How do you vote? If you absolutely, you've heard the story, you should recognize by now that your individual vote, currently, all you're doing is validating and making it appear that our election system is legitimate. So what has to happen in order for changes to take place, and how can you, as an individual who wants to believe that your vote matters, what can you do in your vote to make a change that would have a positive long-term effect on our democracy and our future? And that's relatively simple when you recognize that we are basically in a two-party system. Some states, like the state of Virginia, for example, only recognizes the Republican and Democratic Party. So if you're an independent, then they don't recognize you as being from an actual political party. And that means that you don't get noticed if you are an actual independent wanting to do something different. If you don't want to play in the system that it exists today, the pay to play, then good luck. That's basically it. So as a voter, what do you do? And the answer is very simple. What you do is do not vote. No matter what you do not vote for a Republican or Democratic candidate at all. Vote for a third-party candidate. If there is a third-party candidate, on the ballot, vote for them. Absolutely vote for them. If there is not one on the ballot, but you can do a write-in, then absolutely think about who in your world, in your knowledge and experience, what individual that you know is a person that you think would represent other individuals, and think about other individuals when making decisions and write them in. And last is that if there are no third parties and there's no write-in, then hand in your ballot without having selected any individuals at all. Your vote will still count, and what you will be voting for is none of the same, none of the above. You literally will be voting to change the system. And the only way that we can break this two-party system is if you vote that way. And I encourage you to do so. So this all brings us to a series of odd questions. We're all raised in the United States believing that the election process is somehow our opportunity to elect, to choose candidates who are going to go into particular offices, either local, state, county, or federal, that those elected officials are going to represent us when it comes to making decisions, major decisions that are going to affect all of us. That's traditionally what we've always thought. What would that really look like? It would literally look like representatives in offices that we could contact when we either, one, had an issue with what was happening, had a solution, and the solution needed more than what a single individual could do, and would have benefits for the majority of other people in the society simultaneously, be it healthcare, retirement. Most of the problems that plague our society today, and have for a very long time, it's not that we don't know what the problems are. It's that the people who are elected to represent us to solve these problems, utilizing the shared resources of our entire economy, are not working for us. They're not representing us. They are representing their high-value donors. So real representation would be from people who were not part of that system. Reducing problems and increasing the standard of living for the majority of us would be the result of representative government, and we don't have that. How do we solve this? Well, it's not that difficult. One, we absolutely have to eliminate the system that we now have in place. If the system we have in place is high donors are represented in major decisions that affect our country, then we need to eliminate the system that supports that. Catch-22 here is, well, it's the elected officials who are in the position to change the laws that would change the system that got them elected. Yeah, it's like a catch-22. So what needs to happen is the elected officials need to change the rules on money and politics, literally getting rid of things like lobbyists. Election funds should be as a priority, the election funds should be from the public itself. The number one problem in our quote-unquote democratic process is that individuals who are interested in actually representing other individuals to make decisions that are beneficial for all of us do not have any access to funds that are not just completely controlled by a very small handful of people. So election funds being made public for every elected official position is a starting point. that out of our tax funds come the funds necessary for individuals to be elected into office. So, governor's race, we figure out how much it legitimately costs for 2 people or 3 people running for the governor's office to spend in order to get the attention necessary for them to be heard, and that those funds are equally distributed among the most likely candidates for that position. Second would be term limits, literally reducing the amount of years or careers that any one individual can spend in any elected office. I mean, think about jury duty, right? What would our government look like if literally random polling from our society, from the citizens in our society, were brought about through a jury duty system? I mean, minimum qualifications for particular jobs, sure, but essentially make a list, a database of all of the individuals in the society who would qualify for individual positions based on their experience, and those become the people who are randomly drawn from for a jury duty type election, and have the election between the top 3 or 4 people in that database. So, no individuals standing up and going, I could be a politician, and that means I can go get funding, and I could get put in office, and then I too could benefit from representing high donor individuals. Yeah, that'd be a good idea. Well, I'd like to take the moment just to thank you for listening. If you've listened this far through this video, then you've gone a long way in helping to try to change our system into something that actually looks like representative democracy. Without you, we're never going to get there. And if things continue heading down the same path, it's going to be not good for a lot of us. So I do appreciate your time, and I'll see you in the next one. Well, thanks again. If you've made it this far through the video, I definitely encourage you to like, subscribe, and tell your friends. Definitely, if you want to go out and vote, vote. And I hope that some of this guidance in this video will lead you to maybe change the way you look at our voting system, how you can